Hello, and welcome to the Street Crime UK YouTube channel. Please don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe. Today we take a look at a criminal gang who were notorious in the southwest criminal underworld. In the St Paul's district of Bristol lies the story of one of the most dangerous drug gangs of the 1990s, the Aggie Crew. The Aggie Crew operated from the early 1990s until its violent end in 1998. The crew was led by Clinton Wilson, who was also known as King Aggie. The group dominated the drug scene, and so much so that it became known as the crack cocaine capital city of the UK. The name Aggie Crew originates from an abbreviation of aggravated burglary, which the gang frequently participated in. It is also an acronym of the names of the members of the crew. Towards the end of the 1990s, Jamaican criminals had been moving in on Bristol, as well as many other British towns and cities. At that time, the area was rife with poverty and gang activity, which made it quite a dangerous area to live in, and the perfect environment for developing a thriving drugs gang. In the Aggie Crew's origins, it was just Mr. Wilson and two of his friends when they were merely teenagers. Living in poverty was difficult, and they wanted to find a new way to make money. Opportunities in the city were very limited in poorer communities, as there was less funding for projects, and job openings were rarer and harder to come across, so it was harder to make a living. It began with muggings, simply to obtain money to survive, as they were not earning enough from their youth training scheme. However, things soon started to become very violent, and the crew would hurt those who refused to hand over their cash. Mr. Wilson stated that all I was being offered as a young'un was YTS, which was the youth training scheme. I was earning more money than the YTS when I was 13. You have to think, like, before this, we might be out all day for £20. There's been days where we've robbed 4 or 5 people and just got a fiver between 10 of us. We were prepared to do anything to anybody just to make some money. Eventually, the Aggie Crew had had enough of not earning enough money from robbery, so they went on to sell crack cocaine on the streets of Bristol, as it had much higher rewards. The gang started to grow in numbers at this point, and the surrounding areas of St Paul's district became populated with drug dealers and runners. They also started to carry guns to maintain control and domination, which triggered the police to release more armed forces onto the streets for people's safety. Frequent police raids were carried out at known drug dealers' accommodations, but the problem was not getting any better. They weren't afraid to hurt people, as Mr. Wilson bluntly states. We'd only take our gun out if we was going to shoot somebody. However, Mr. Wilson also states that he has never shot anyone himself. In Bristol, the Black and White Cafe is known for being a hotspot for drug activity. It was also the site of the St Paul's riot of 1980 of the ethnic minority, specifically the black youth of Bristol. Some news sources state that the riot involved 100 to 200 people, but other sources state that there was a crowd of over 2,000 participants. 130 people were arrested and 90 were charged. As a result of this, the local government started to pay attention to issues that arose and attempted to do something about them. However, poverty is still widespread across this area. It has been reported that the Black and White Cafe in Bristol was raided more times than anywhere else in the country, often has led to more drugs being found, which in turn gave the area a much worse reputation than it had to begin with. This has made a vicious cycle, as the lower reputation inevitably causes house prices to fall, which means the majority of the population inhabiting the area are living in poverty. Businesses are therefore less attracted to the area, meaning there is less work for everyone. This also means that people have to find other means of making money. The black and white cafe served food, but its success was majorly contributed to the booming Class A drug trade which was taking place inside the business. However, due to legal action, the cafe closed its doors in 2004 and has since been demolished and been replaced by new homes. For the Aggie crew, this was their drugs den, their territory, from where they sold their product and where people knew they could go to get their stuff to get high. In 2003, after some members of the crew had been released from prison, a fight started over the cafe. When the group had vacated the premises and had been arrested after a previous police raid, other gangs such as the Hype Crew and the Mountain View Posse, who were also in alliance with smaller groups such as the Back to Back Gang and Gucci, moved in on the Aggie crew's territory, now claiming it as theirs. The Aggie crew obviously did not approve of this and set out to claim what they believed was theirs. The Aggie crew armed themselves with guns and stormed the pubs, shops and streets, demanding that rival gangs and gangsters who had moved in on their territory must pay them tax in order for them to continue running their trade from their territory. The Aggie crew had ordered the rival gangsters to pay £50 per person daily and £100 per business, and if they didn't pay up, they would suffer the consequences. The new gangs did not agree with these terms, as they believed it was their right to stay there and refused to pay the Aggie crew the money. This created a lot of tension in the city between the groups, and eventually a violent turf war broke out between the gangs. An article from a national newspaper in 2003 states that 5 members of the Aggie crew put on balaclavas, picked up guns, and made a personal tour of the local bars of Bristol. This included the Black Swan, the Malcolm X Centre, Lubeck's, and the Caribbean Club. The Aggie crew announced that they were taking over. Gun crime in Bristol increased dramatically after this. The first incident involved a Hype crew member being shot, followed by a shooting of an Aggie crew member. There were many shootings that followed, kidnappings of opposing gang members for negotiation, and as an act of disrespect towards the other rival gangs, the Aggie crew robbed everyone at gunpoint at the Black and White Cafe, taking all their money and belongings, and later shot fireworks into the building to try and provoke a gunfight. There were deaths of members on both sides of the fight, and many were injured. There was also a lot of property damage, due to the dangerous nature of their actions. The police arrested the majority of the crew at the site, and more through raids of the homes of the members of the gang. After this incident, armed police were released to patrol the streets, as there was a constant fear that further gang violence was going to occur. The feud was going to be very short-lived. In 1998, the reign of the Aggie crew ended. 300 police officers were involved in raids in which they found many guns, including pistols and shotguns, lots of ammunition, and had arrested 6 members after they caught them holding and dealing an estimated £1 million worth of crack cocaine inside their drugs den. Mr. Wilson was arrested and was given 2 prison sentences, one for 5 years and one for 7 years, whilst some of the other members of the gang were deported back to their home country of Jamaica. In 2019, Mr. Wilson, the former leader of the multi-million-pound Bristol drugs empire, is now also a rapper, spoke on a documentary Beyond the Front Line on the BBC, talking about how he has left a life of crime behind and is very, very sorry. Definitely very sorry for the people that he has hurt and that he has robbed. Mr. Wilson is now dedicated to helping men and youth in his community through a new scheme which is helping the police to lessen the amount of knife crime, street crime and drug offences occurring in the lower income areas of the UK. Mr. Wilson hopes to help those in poor circumstances avoid slipping into a life of crime and ending up spending a period of their life in jail. Instead of being sent to prison when you are arrested, Young offenders between the ages of 16 and 21 can join the call-in program, where they are given access to free education, apprenticeships, agility and fitness training, and even driving lessons to help them get back on the right path and try and find legal ways to make money instead of turning to crime. Statistics show that the scheme has proven to be effective. However, there has been one instance where a member has been kicked off the program due to being found selling Class A drugs. Nevertheless, the program is proving to have a positive influence on the community. The Aggie crew had a huge impact on the drug scene in Bristol due to their violent nature and the events of what happened in their reign. Many other gangs in Bristol have tried to follow in their footsteps ever since. Drug dealing is still a very prominent problem in the city, but police and local government are doing everything they can to try and tackle the problem. The crime rate has decreased since the gang has dispersed, but the Aggie crew's mark is still prominent and will stay prominent in the UK criminal history. What are your opinions of the Aggie crew? Do you believe the crime rate in Bristol has dropped since the Aggie crew dispersed? Mr. Wilson has been able to turn his life around and is now able to help those in a less fortunate position than himself not go down the wrong path and make the same mistakes that he once made. This is a challenging feat, especially for someone who was as entrenched as Mr. Wilson was in the criminal underworld. We wish him all the best in the future with his music and with helping the younger generation make the right choices. Thank you for joining us today. If you liked today's content, please don't forget to like and share. And if you're new to the channel and you want to see more street crime UK content, please don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell button so you can join us on the next video. Thank you for joining us today, and until next time, stay safe. Hello and welcome to the Street Crime UK YouTube channel. Please don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe. Today we're going to take a look at the case of the 40 Elephants, or the 40 Thieves Gang, which were a 19th to 20th century all-female London crime syndicate who specialised in shoplifting. The gang was notable for its longevity and its skill in avoiding police detection. The 40 Thieves operated from Elephant and Castle in the London area, and they were allied with the Elephant and Castle mob led by the MacDonald brothers. They raided quality stores in the West End of London and ranged all over the country. The gang was also known to masquerade as housewives for wealthy families before ransacking their homes, often using false references. They were in existence from at least 1873 to the 1950s, with some indications that they may have existed until the late 18th century. During the early 20th century, the gang was led by Alice Diamond, known variously as the Queen of the 40 Thieves, and as Diamond Annie, and as a friend of Maggie Hill, sister of the gangster Billy Hill. Their heyday was in the inner war period, when the gang raided on a large scale, not only on the West End of London, but also in other major shopping centres across the country. They also forced smaller gangs to pay a tribute on what they had stolen and would punish criminals who did not obey their rules. The gang had its own set of rules and demanded loyalty from its members, and in others of their supply and distribution network. Alice Diamond ruled with absolute authority, with the cooperation of Maggie Hill, Gertrude Scully, the Partridge Sisters, and many others. Over 70 direct members of the gang, operating in the 1920s and 1930s, have been identified. Reports that the gang collapsed when their leaders were jailed for the 1925 Battle of Lambeth were incorrect. The gang was still in existence after World War II, as new family members replaced the old hands. They were often said to be able to meet equal numbers of men in battle, and were admired by their male counterparts in the Elephant Gang for their organisation and expertise. One member of the gang, Lillian Goldstein, or Nee Kendall, was known to the police as the bobbed-haired bandit, the lover of Elephant Gang associate Ruby Sparks, and driver on his smash and grab raids. It is unclear how long the gang operated. The earliest mention of the gang in the newspaper dates to 1873, but police records from London indicate that the female shoplifters had been active in the area since the late 18th century. The original gang members wore women's clothing, which was modified to include hidden pockets. They could hide their loot in their coats, cummerbunds, muffs, skirts, bloomers and hats. They raided large stores in the West End of London. Due to the prudish attitude of the era, female customers were afforded privacy from the store staff, giving female shoplifters the opportunity to escape notice. The gang stole goods worth thousands of pounds. The female gang members earned enough money to financially support their male spouses. The spouses in question included both idle men who lounged at home and inmates of the British prison system. The gang eventually became well known to the area, and especially with the high-class shops which they typically targeted. Their mere presence would cause panic, eliminating the secrecy for requirement in their activities. Their response to this challenge was to expand their activities from London to other British towns, where they were much less known. They targeted rural areas and seaside towns. During the 20th century, the gang modernised their activities. They invested in fast cars to transport their loot, and to use as getaway vehicles which they could outrun the police. The loot was transferred through the British railway system. The members used the trains to travel to a town and deposited their empty suitcases at the railway stations. During their return trip, the suitcases were filled with stolen goods. Besides shoplifting, the gang developed sidelines such as looting houses and blackmailing individuals. Gang members used false reference letters to get hired as maids and then rob the houses of their employers. They also managed to seduce men into brief affairs and then blackmailed them with threats of ruining their reputations. By the 1920s, the gang members started imitating the so-called Bright Young Things group, whose exploits appeared in popular press. The gang members led extravagant and decadent lifestyles by imitating the exploits of the era's movie stars and flappers. Part of their earnings was used to finance party events and spend lavishly at clubs, pubs and restaurants which the gang members frequented. The gang was particularly territorial of their turf. Other shoplifters who stole from their shops on their turf were forced to pay the gang a percentage of their takings. If the intruder refused to pay, the gang arranged beatings and kidnappings for the offenders until the payment was received. While various gang members were arrested and convicted at times, their prison sentences tended to be short. They could be sentenced to either 12 months or penal labour of 3 years of incarceration. Once released, they returned back to the gang. Several members remained with the gang for a relatively long time. Gang member known as Ada Wellman was initially arrested in 1921 and was still with the gang and arrested for another offence in 1939. While the gang members often stole clothing items, they typically did not wear the stolen clothes. Their loot was distributed to a network of fences, street market traders and pawnbrokers. Part of the stolen clothing items were sold to clothing stores, which simply replaced the labels and modified their designs. Some of the fences associated with the gang were also arrested, but could not be convicted. Ada McDonald was arrested and suspected of offence in 1910. She used the ledgers of a suspected authenticity to convince the authorities that the goods in her possession were the products of a legitimate financial transaction. Jane Durrell, another suspected fence, and her common-law husband Jim Bullock were both placed on trial in 1911. The jury decided that the police evidence against them was insufficient and they were acquitted of the charges and released. One afternoon in 1915, a group of elegantly dressed women arrived in hired cars at the prestigious Selfridges department store in London. They were dressed in furs, jewels and expensive dresses, and the staff treated them as if they would any upscale female customer. Given the era's prudish ways, this meant ignoring the women in order to allow them to try on clothes in privacy. It was only after the women had left that the staff realised these women had shoplifted a fortune's worth of gems, furs and clothing. These were no ordinary shoppers. They were members of London's first documented all-female gang, the 40 Elephants, also known as the 40 Thieves. The 40 Elephants were established in the 1870s when the female thieves of South London organised to remove themselves from the control of the male-dominated Elephant and Castle mob. The men's gang had occasionally worked with women as accomplices, but the smaller role meant that smaller cut of earnings were given out. Schism was overseen by the artist model and expert thief named Mary Carr, who became the queen of the new gang. The Elephant and Castle gangsters agreed to provide protection and occasional assistance to the 40 Elephants in exchange for a portion of their earnings. Miss Carr's expertise was in hoisting, stealing goods, then reselling them through fences. The gang's goal was never to retain the items they had stolen, but to become rich by selling them to third parties. Acquired most of their goods through shoplifting, seducing and blackmailing influential men, and conning their way into jobs as housemaids, only to loot the homes where they worked. The gang focused primarily on the theft of gems, jewellery, furs, and fashion items. With the money they made through resale, purchased even more expensive items for themselves, never wearing what they had stolen. Alice Diamond, an even more formidable woman, succeeded Miss Carr as the Queen in 1916. Miss Diamond had been a skilled shoplifter since her childhood. She was known to wear diamond rings as a makeshift brass knuckle. This was her way of displaying her love for glamour and her love for violence. She was striking, powerful, and stood at 5'9", in a time where the average man was probably about 5'6". The other thieves, most of whom were much older, fell in line behind her leadership skills and vision. She intuitively knew the effect of styling could have on their chances for success. And under her influence, the 40 Elephants became known for their decadent excess and trendy, expensive attire. Media attention increased along with their coffers. Miss Diamond effectively reorganized the gang by splitting them into separate cells. This allowed for simultaneous robberies to occur in various parts of the city, dividing the police's attention and catching shopkeepers by surprise. She created a Hoisters Code, a code of conduct that outlined the democratic manner in which the gang had operated, including provisos detailing the equal division of money from the heist jobs, an expectation for the gang to care for family members of an imprisoned thief, and for the women to always provide alibis for each other. Miss Diamond also codified an expectation of absolute loyalty, and it was punishable by ridicule or beating when disobeyed. While her guidelines were strictly enforced, so too were a number of other rules ensuring the smooth operation of the criminal syndicate, such as one forbidding theft or money or boyfriends among the members. The group's shared treasury was used to assist members in trouble and pay for lawyers, as well as to fund extravagant lifestyles. Members in the gang were akin to being part of a union with unusually fair benefits for all. Miss Diamond was ruthless in protecting her gang's territory. Should an outsider steal from a shop in their area, they demanded that the interloper pay a percentage of their taking. If an offender refused, the gang would beat and sometimes kidnap until they agreed to pay the terms. The media's portrayal of the 40 Elephants continued to expand their legend, and their enemies continued to underestimate them. The newspapers wrote about Miss Diamond and her gang as gorgeous party girls, but the women were just as brutal as other street gangs. Glamour was both a goal and a smokescreen for the 40 Elephants, through which they created their own thrilling world of fashion, money and fame. In the 1920s, the 40 Elephants reached the pinnacle of their success and notoriety. Miss Diamond instituted numerous clever tricks into the gang's arsenal, ensuring that all thieves were equipped with secret pockets and flaps in their gowns to facilitate shoplifting. They were also early adopters of automobiles, making their getaways in the most glamorous of models. They confounded police by handing off stolen goods to an unseen accomplice on foot before dashing off in a high-speed car chase. Police were left befuddled when they caught up with the car and found it devoid of any stolen goods. Cars also allowed the members to expand their operation outside of London to nearby towns. All the better once Miss Diamond and other faces became too well known to the local law enforcement agencies to go incognito. Ultimately, Miss Diamond was undone by her interesting fixation on controlling the gang. The Hoisters Code forbade members from doing anything against Miss Diamond's wishes, including marrying men she did not approve of. When a member defied her in 1925, Miss Diamond led the gang in a brutal attack against the newlyweds, so destructive that it became known as the Lambeth Riot. For her role as the instigator, Miss Diamond was sentenced to 18 months in prison. By the time she was freed, a new queen had taken over. Miss Diamond turned to a career of managing a brothel, while still offering advice to young aspiring thieves. One of her proteges, Shirley Pitts, was acknowledged the queen of the gang in the 1960s. Miss Pitt's operation was on a smaller scale than that of her mentor. Changing fashions made it harder to stow shoplifted loot inside clothing as stores increased security and surveillance. The 40 Elephants officially disbanded upon Miss Pitt's death in 1992, but membership and activity have been in decline for decades. By the time of Miss Pitt's passing, the 40 Elephants were a folk legend rather than the active threat. Yet the 40 Elephants remain one of the most successful and longest lasting criminal organisations in English history. While men gangs rose and fell around them, Miss Carr and Miss Diamond's ruthless efficiency and Cammy leadership allowed for their group to thrive. Miss Diamond's gang stormed into department stores so many times that the staff grew to recognise her and knew to keep watch. Ever flexible, she knew her own notoriety and, to her advantage, turned herself to distracting to a lesser known member to rob them unnoticed. Her mentorship grew in future generations of female thieves, providing both a role model and a route for lower class girls to achieve independence. Thank you for joining us today. What are your opinions on the 40 Elephants gang? Please let us know what you think in the comments below. Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed this content, please don't forget to like and share. And if you're new to the channel and want to see more Street Crime UK content, press subscribe and hit that bell so you can join us on the next video. Thank you for joining us.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Street Crime UK YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more exciting content. Today we'll be taking a look at the infamous Gooch Close Gang of Manchester. The Gooch Close Gang, also known as the GCOGs, Gooch Close Original Gangsters, or simply the Gooch in Manchester, was an organised crime group based in Moss Side and surrounding neighbourhoods of South Manchester, England. Most members of the gang grew up on the west side of Alexandra Park Estate in Moss Side around Gooch Close, which is where the gang gets its name. The Gooch is part of an alliance of Crip gangs which has had violent disputes with many other South Manchester gangs, most notably the Doddington Gang, formerly known as the Pepperhill Mob, the Moss Side Bloods and the Longside Crew. The Gooch Gang has its origins in the west side of the Alexandra Park Estate in Moss Side. Young men would hang around a shebeen on Gooch Close selling drugs, which is where the gang started and how they got their name. A shebeen is just another place for an establishment or a private house that sells alcohol and is usually unlicensed. Gooch Close was a small cul-de-sac of semi-detached houses with an alley at one end. In the mid-1990s, the Alexandra Park Estate was redeveloped and the street was redesigned and had its name changed to Westerling Way. The gangs, while supplying to the street dealers, also tried to ensure that the dealers were protected from other gangs by protecting their territory. Most of their problems occurred when rival street dealers started to move into the territory already controlled by a gang, or when a gang taxed a rival dealer. A move seen as damaging street credibility and respect. The gangs in South Manchester, including the Gooch Gang, were made up of mostly first and second generation British, West Indies, Caribbean heritage members, whose grandparents came to England from the 1950s. Around the same time as the Gooch Gang Close was becoming known around the city, the Pepperhill Gang were also starting to emerge, taking their name from a pub on the east side of the Alexandra Park Estate. When the pub closed down and the gang targeted by police, they reformed around nearby Doddington Close and would go on to become known as the Doddington Gang. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, the Pepperhill Gang were involved in a gang war between Moss Side and the Cheetham Hill Gang from North Manchester. The Gooch often brought and sold drugs with the Cheetham Hill Gang. The Gooch had close ties to Cheetham Hill, with the cousin of Cheetham Hill head being a leading figure in the Gooch. The Pepperhill Gang thought this was a helping the enemy kind of thing, and the Pepperhill Gang declared that nobody from South Manchester was to have dealings with Cheetham Hill anymore. This angered the Gooch and a fierce war erupted, dividing the Alexandra Park Estate in half, with the Gooch on the west side and the Pepperhill on the east side, although the gang war was centred around Moss Side. Young males from neighbouring areas would be drawn into the conflict, resulting in a number of deaths and regular shooting incidents in South Manchester through the 1990s and 2000s. In 1996, an offshoot gang was identified, Young Gooch, which contained a frightening reputation for the violence and guns its members used. 5 of its members were later arrested following Operation Eagle and were sentenced to more than 43 years in prison. The Young Gooch started to war with the newly emerging Longside Crew, a younger offshoot of the Doddington Gang, whose members were based on a number of estates in the Longside and Ardwick areas of South Manchester, especially their headquarters of Langport Avenue. By the mid-2000s, the Gooch had grown to become a vast gang made up of a number of smaller offshoots crews based around South Manchester. The most notable of these being the Longsight Street Soldiers, or the Old Trafford Crips, or the Rush Home Crips, and Fallowfield Mad Dogs. These gangs would carry out on the rivalry with Doddington and Longsight Crew in the 2000s. It's also notable that most gangs that roam the streets of the UK today are offshoots from these revolutionary gangs. Ten members of the South Manchester's Gooch gang were put on a trial in October 2008 for a catalogue of gang-related crimes. Gang members Mr. Colin Joyce and Mr. Lee Amos had been arrested in 2000 when they had been apprehended at their nerve centre in a house in Moss Side, found with an extraordinary array of firearms. In 2001 they had been sentenced to 9 years in prison, but had been released early on licence in 2007, and there had been followed out a new bout of shootings after. In April 2009, Mr. Joyce and Mr. Amos were among 11 members of the Gooch gang who were found guilty and charged with a catalogue of crimes, which included the murder of Mr. Ukal Chin, Mr. Tyrone Gilbert, which we'll be taking a closer look at in a little bit. These convictions were hailed by Manchester's Chief Prosecutor John Holt as having enormous significance for the public safety. Their trials were held 35 miles away at Liverpool Crown Court to lower the risk of witness intimidation from other gang members. Not unusually, the perpetrators of gun crime were also the victims, with Mr. Amos's brother, Mr. Stephen Babatunde Amos, having been shot dead in a gang-related shooting aged 21 outside a bar in Ashton-under-Lyne in 2002. Mr. Colin Joyce, aged 29, known as the leader of the gang, was given a minimum 39-year sentence. Mr. Lee Amos was sentenced to receive at least 35 years. 3 other members of the gang were given minimum sentences of between 30 and 35 years. 11 members of the Gooch gang were found guilty of charges ranging from murder and gun possession to drug dealing in 2009. Since their arrest, gang-related shootings in Manchester have fallen by a massive 92%, and there have been no gang-related murders for a year. Gang leaders Mr. Colin Joyce and Mr. Lee Amos were convicted of the drive-by killing of a mourner at the funeral of a man who had been executed months earlier. Mr. Joyce, who called himself the General, had left a trail of mayhem across Manchester as his gang tortured and attacked rivals. It culminated in the murders of Mr. Ukal Chin, and then aged 24, and Mr. Tyrone Gilbert, then aged 23, linked to the rival Longsight Crew. Detective Chief Inspector Stephen Eckersley said, "I'm absolutely delighted that the members of this ruthless gang are off the streets. They were prepared to use deadly violence to enforce their will and settle scores with their rivals. The implications of their conviction for this entire city are immense." All 11 gang members have now been found guilty at Liverpool Crown Court of 26 out of 27 charges, ranging from murder and gun possession to drug dealing. Mr. Joyce, whose trouser pockets were specially adapted to act as gun holsters, led the Gooch gang in dealing drugs, torturing street dealers who crossed them, and targeting rivals. Gang warfare erupted in the city in 2007 after the pair were released on licence from a jail for firearms offences. On June 15th, Mr. Chin was driving around in South Manchester when he was ambushed by killers in a silver Audi who blasted him 7 times with a converted Russian Baikal pistol. 6 weeks after Mr. Chin's death on July 27th, father of 3, Mr. Tyrone Gilbert, attended the funeral and the wake and continued at Mr. Ukal's family home in Frobisher Close, Longsight. Shortly before midnight, the Gooch gang drove past in a Honda Legend, closely followed by a blue Audi and another silver car. The gathering of around 80 mourners was sprayed with gunfire from a Smith & Wesson and a Dirty Harry style Magnum revolver and a 9mm semi-automatic machine gun. Mr. Gilbert was killed by a single bullet to the chest. Also in the dock during the 6-month-long period, £5 million trial was Mr. Narada Williams, also known as Yardy, and his brother Mr. Ricardo, Mr. Hassin Shah, and Mr. Areen Campbell. Mr. Chin was shot in June 2007 as tensions reignited between the Longsight Crew and the Gooch gang. Mr. Ukal's family has always denied that he was a gang member, but he did have a known Longsight crew member in the car with him on the day he was ambushed on Anson Road, Longsight. The victim of the 5th drive-by shooting that week in Manchester, it is unlikely that UCAL was spotted by chance by Mr. Joyce and Mr. Amos while they were out cruising in the area. Weeks before his death, he became father to a baby girl, described by loved ones as a loving, caring boy with no enemies. He was studying at college in the hope of becoming an engineer. His funeral was attended by scores of people, and because of the nature of his death, the service and the West Indian Centre wake that followed were given police protection. After the official celebrations, an impromptu wake was held near UCAL's family home. The gunmen, who probably employed spotters to track the movement of mourners, targeted this, knowing Longsight crew members were likely to be there. Mr. Tyrone Gilbert was a Longsight crew member trying to change his ways at the time of his death. By the age of 23, the gang lifestyle meant he had already been touched by more tragedy than most people experience in a lifetime. His brother, Mr. Marcus Greenidge, was gunned down by the Pitbull crew in 2000, and he was with Mr. Fabian Flowers, 19, who was killed after a key fob gun went off in Stockport nightclub on a fatal night in 2005. 2 years earlier, Mr. Tyrone had enrolled on a course aimed at helping young adults take back into education, and after serving a sentence for a fray and a showdown between Longsight crew and the Gooch gang at Manchester Royal Infirmary, he renewed efforts to change his ways in 2007. After he was murdered while attending his friend's wake, Mr. Tyrone had been avoiding old haunts and had only returned to the Grove Village estate for the funeral. But in the weeks before Mr. Tyrone was killed, Mr. Narada Williams of the Gooch gang was seen asking around for him, apparently with bad intentions in mind. In a tragic twist, Mr. Tyrone ended up being the victim of indiscriminate shooting after the Gooch gang opened fire on the mourners near Mr. UCAL's family home in July 2007. Now an investigation under the Proceeds of Crime Act will try to work out what senior members did with the money they made drug dealing, trading in guns and acting as underworld fixers. Among the convicted men was self-styled General Mr. Colin Joyce, the gang leader, who has spent most of his last decade in prison. He is believed to have amassed a large amount of money from being a gangland armourer during the periods of freedom. Officers will now try to establish if he has invested the proceeds in carefully concealed business interests. The defendants also included Mr. Narada Williams of Fallowfield and Mr. Ricardo Williams of Moston. The brothers were said at their Liverpool Crown Court trial to have made up to £2,000 a day selling drugs. Their enterprise stretched from nightclubs to street corner deals, and even involved throw-overs where drugs were hurled in modified tennis balls over prison walls. Despite this, officers investigating them before Liverpool Crown Court trial were unable to find much evidence of high living beyond the taste of hire cars and gold jewellery. A Proceeds of Crime investigation is expected to start shortly, which will establish if the money was frittered away and invested back into crime or laundered into legitimate businesses. Detective Chief Superintendent Steve Haywood, head of GMP's Serious Crime Division, said, "We have invested heavily in seizure teams, and all our major investigations are subject to a Proceeds of Crime Act cash and asset survey to determine whether any assets have been attained by illegal means. A lot of our more serious criminals find it very easy to do the time. They find it really difficult if you then take the house off them or their wife and kids, because they got that by criminal means. Investigations into organised crime gangs, whose main purpose is wealth creation, tend to be easier. Some of our South Manchester gangs are based on power and kudos, not necessarily wealth." Recent news on the Gooch gang. Armed police swooped on 3 men strongly associated with the notorious Gooch gang after they received a wicked shotgun during a handover on a quiet residential street in broad daylight. Undercover officers watched the handover of the semi-automatic single-barrel shotgun, which occurred on Sky Close in Haywood after 1 PM 2019. They then followed Mr. Waqas Farouk, and then 34-year-old, and then Mr. Zahid Mahood, who was then 30 years old, and Mr. Jamal Chambers, then 24 years old, to Whaley Range, where they struck and recovered the weapon. A judge said Mr. Farouk wanted to acquire the shotgun as part of his drug dealing activities. Now 7 men have been jailed for a total of 65 years in relation to the handover of the weapon. Manchester Crown Court heard that others, including Mr. Tariq Khalik and Mr. Mashek Pennock and Mr. Jordan Starkley, all 28 years old in 2019, had arranged for a man called Mr. Tyrone Keigri Simmons to deliver the weapon and 29 cartridges to Mr. Farouk, Mr. Mahood and Mr. Chambers. As they met in Haywood, Mr. Khalik, who appears to be wearing a black glove, was seen showing Mr. Farouk, Mr. Mahmood and Mr. Chambers the firearm in the holdall, possibly demonstrating how it could be used. The shotgun had been delivered in a large holdall by Mr. Keigri Simmons, who walked over to a field where the cars were parked. Mr. Farouk, Mr. Mahmood and Mr. Chambers then drove in tandem down to Brooklyn Avenue in Whaley Range, where they sat in the car and an Audi A3 and thought to be examining the weapon. Minutes later, at about 2:37 PM on October 18, 2019, armed police struck and arrested the trio. Mr. Chambers, who had been there to provide muscle, ran off, but was caught shortly after by police. He was found to have an Armani bag containing heroin. He also had a small knife and about £500 in cash. Mr. Farouk also had an Armani bag, which contained digital scales and £710 in cash. At the police station, officers found 5 wraps of cocaine and 5 wraps of heroin stuffed down the front of his trousers. A firearms expert tested the weapon and found that it was in poor condition. Out of 20 to 30 attempts to fire the shotgun, it only discharged twice. One barrister said it was pot luck whether the shotgun would fire or not, but Judge Hilary Manley said the shotgun in this case is a wicked lethal weapon. It matters little that it was in poor condition. The other 4 men were also arrested. In searches of their homes, police found a cannabis farm containing 25 plants at Mr. Khalik's property, as well as scales, £1,300 in cash and body armour. Cocaine and cannabis were also found at Mr. Keigri Simmons' house, and body armour and a balaclava were also seized at Mr. Pinnock's residence. Prosecutor Julian King told the court the prosecution case is that Mr. Farouk, Mr. Mahmood and Mr. Chambers, Mr. Khalik and Mr. Pinnock are all involved in serious crime, and they are all strongly associated in various ways to the Gooch Gang. But Judge Manley said the evidence showed that it was more likely that they were on the margins of the gang activity rather than the members. In 2009, a judge said members of the Gooch Gang have been involved in crimes reminiscent of Al Capone and Chicago in the era of Prohibition. When firearms fall into the hands of organised criminals, catastrophic harm can be caused. Criminals use firearms to bolster their power, to enforce their threats and criminality, and to further their criminal activities. Mr. Farouk, Mr. Mahmood and Mr. Chambers were all jailed for 11 years. Mr. Farouk of Northley Road, Old Trafford, and Mahmood of Lyndon Avenue, Old Trafford, pleaded guilty to conspiracy to possess a firearm and ammunition with intent to endanger life. Mr. Chambers of No Fixed Abode was found guilty of the same offence after a trial. Mr. Farouk was also dealt with for possession with intent to supply heroin and cocaine. Mr. Chambers for possession with intent to supply heroin and possessing a bladed article, and Mr. Mahmood was sentenced for unrelated offences of possession with intent to supply cannabis and dangerous driving. Mr. Khalik of Torbay Road, Urmston, was jailed for 10.5 years after admitting conspiracy to possess a firearm and ammunition with intent to endanger life and producing cannabis. Mr. Pinnock of Ash Avenue, Cheadle, was jailed for 10 years after pleading guilty to conspiracy to possess a firearm and ammunition with intent to endanger life. Mr. Keigri Simmons of Gordon Way, Haywood, and Mr. Starkey of Argyle Street, Haywood, both pleaded guilty to conspiracy to supply a prohibited firearm. Mr. Keigri Simmons also admitted possession with intent to supply of cannabis. He was locked up for 6 years, while Mr. Starkey received a sentence of 5.5 years. After the hearing, Detective Sergeant Phil Kennedy of GMP's Serious and Organised Crime Group said that this was an in-depth investigation that has resulted in a lethal weapon and 7 very dangerous individuals being removed from our streets. This gun would have doubtlessly been used to further the criminal aims of those commissioning its use. Seizures of this nature are an invaluable part of our fight against organised crimes. What do you think about the Gooch Gang? Let us know in the comments below.
Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a like and a share, and leave any thoughts or suggestions you have in the comments section. We love to read through them all. And if you're new but enjoy UK true crime content, then subscribe to see when our newest video releases. And as always, stay safe.
Hello and welcome to the Street Crime UK YouTube channel. Please don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe. Today we take a closer look into one of the most dangerous gang wars to take place in Scotland. The Daniels and Lyons feud. The original source of the animosity between the two crime families dates back to 2001, when a large stash of Daniels cocaine was stolen from a house in the Milton housing scheme and sold on to the Lyons. Milton was Lyons' territory, and they felt the Daniels from nearby Possil were making moves on their turf. For almost 2 decades now, the bitter feud between the two gangs has seen fatal and non-fatal shootings, knifings, vehicle hit and runs, firebomb attacks, police corruption, witness intimidation and drugs, shed loads of drugs. For the most part, the Daniels have been at the top. The Lyons, headed up by Stephen Lyons, thought to be in Dubai after a targeted gun ambush in 2006, fled Scotland to Spain. His cousin, Michael, died in the attack. Hitman Raymond Anderson and James MacDonald were convicted of Michael's murder and jailed for life. The Lyons are alleged to have forged links with the Dublin crime family, the Kinahans. The Lyons have enjoyed immunity and establishment approval since 1992, as Eddie Sr., already well known to the police, was given disused Churnside School in Milton as a community project. He was given 1.4 million in public funding, all whilst using the place as a headquarters of his crime empire. Other known associates of the Lyons from Paisley were Stuart Specky Boyd, Robert Piggy Pickett and George Goofy Doherty. All three are some of the most violent and dangerous villains to ever pick up a blade. They targeted Mark Rennie in 1995 for a £40 drug debt that spiralled out of control. For the first attempt on Rennie's life, Piggy got 12 years and Goofy got 7. Also from Paisley and part of the Lyons gang are Stuart Gillespie and William Basil Burns. Stuart, in a separate incident, shot and killed Rennie and was given a 25-year sentence. The Daniels family has been run by Bonzo Daniels since the death of Jamie Daniels in 2016 from cancer. It's also been said that the matriarch Annette Daniels, Bonzo's mum, and was once married to Ian Blink MacDonald, is in charge. She recently called Daniels' syndicate members to a meeting in Dubai. Before Jamie Daniels' death, he was moving between safe houses and was flanked by ex-military armed guards. His death left a vacuum that saw attacks increase. Known associates of the Daniels are Edinburgh Kingpin, Mark Richardson and Barry and James Gillespie from Rutherglen. Tensions boiled over in 2003 when Eddie Lyons Sr., 8-year-old son Gary's, who died from leukemia, had his headstone vandalised. Kevin the Gerbil Carroll was blamed, and in November that year he was left fighting for his life after being shot. Attacking a family member made it personal for the Daniels. Kevin Carroll was the long-term partner of Jamie Daniels' daughter, Kelly Green, and best friends with his sons Robert and Francis Fraggle since school. In early December came the most bloody attack by the Daniels at the Apple Row MOT Centre, owned by Eddie Sr.'s brother David. 2 masked gunmen walked into the garage and shot Eddie Sr.'s son Stephen, David's son Michael, and their best friend Robert Piggy Pickett. 10 days after the shooting, David Lyons received a ransom note which said, "The boys owe me 25,000 and I want what is owed to me. They all know what it's about and the money doesn't matter to me as it's got to be paid by the piper. I don't want the police, the boys, not even your wife knowing about it. If you keep them out of this, all your lives can go back to normal, as we are all losing money through this. If you have any tricks for my pickup man, then all deals are off. Remember to keep your mouth shut. No cameras, no surveillance, as the pickup man doesn't know anything, so he's no use to you. Drop off 4 PM Saturday. I'll draw you a map, X will mark the spot. Kevin the Gerbil Carroll was suspected of giving the order for the hit and police questioned him, but no charges were brought. In 2008, James MacDonald and Robert Anderson were found guilty and ordered to serve a minimum of 35 years in prison, the longest sentences ever handed down by Scottish courts. This was, however, reduced upon appeal. As Mr. Carroll grew up, he became a top lieutenant in the Daniels gang and ran a group of men who staged alien abductions on rival dealers, mainly dealers who worked for the Lions. They were called alien abductions because so-called victims were usually found wandering in a state of undress and would claim not to remember anything afterwards. Mr. Carroll was by most accounts a maniac and incorrigible, not a great combination. One story suggests that the alien and abduction crew robbed a rival dealer of 4 kilos of cocaine, and Mr. Carroll told him, "You're taxed, you bum." In July 2007, Mr. Carroll was sent to prison for 18 months for possession of high-velocity ammunition. Mr. Carroll met his demise on the 13th of January 2010, as he sat in the back seat of a black Audi outside Asda Superstore in Robertson. There is little doubt he was set up, and a police officer was jailed for leaking information to the alleged hitman. Mr. Carroll was approached by 3 gunmen as he sat in the Audi. The child locks had conveniently been on, leaving him no way to get out, and shot him 5 times through the window as the men in the front seats fled. One of these men phoned Francis Fraggle Green, Mr. Carroll's longtime friend, his partner Kelly's brother, who arrived before the police and searched Carroll's body, removing his mobile phone. In the year before his death, it's alleged that Mr. Carroll had made $1.5 million from taxing drugs, cash and jewellery. William Patterson, part of the Lions gang, was convicted of Mr. Carroll's murder, even though he lodged a defence that more than 6 others could have carried out the murder. He was caged for 22 years in 2015. The Hanlon twins, James and Brian, who were good friends with gangland enforcer Kevin the Gerbil Carroll, both were attacked in separate attacks. Brian was driving along Mary Hill Road, Glasgow at 11:30 PM on a Sunday evening when he was run off the road by a silver BMW 5 Series and a dark coloured 4x4. His Audi S4 estate hit a wall and he was hauled out and attacked by up to 7 thugs armed with chisels and hammers. Brian's penis was chopped off in the attack, as well as his injuries to his back passage, multiple fractures and a severe head injury. Just weeks before, his own twin brother James had holes bored in his head with a power drill. James was pursued while driving his silver Vauxhall Vectra for 4 miles by unknown assailants in a black Audi. They proceeded to ram his car, and another vehicle that had been waiting in a lane rammed James's vehicle again. 6 men armed with power tools, hammers and chisels had piled out the 2 vehicles and chased James, who tried to run. They pinned him down and proceeded to drill holes into his head. This brazen attack happened in broad daylight and James only survived as passing motorists rang 999. September 2015. Ross Sherlock, an associate of Kevin the Gerbil Carroll, was outside St Helens Primary School as he went to pick up his daughter whilst wearing a bulletproof vest, where 3 shots were fired and 2 hit him in the arm. William Burns and Alexander Porter stood trial for the shooting. Mr. Sherlock was accused of stealing £2.2 million from a house in Castlemilk. He had previously been stabbed in the face with a car key in the Prince's shopping mall by Mr. Sherlock. Mr. Sherlock was accused of stealing £2.2 million from a house in Castlemilk. He had previously been stabbed in the face with a car key in the Prince's shopping mall. Mr. Sherlock had 6 attempts on his life in total due to the war with the Lion Syndicate. In one of those attempts, he was shot at close range back in 2006 alongside Kevin Carroll. In March 2017, Christopher Dixon attacked Ross Sherlock, who was on remand for failing to give evidence against the 2 men on trial for shooting him. But there are conflicting reports, as another article names a Mark Quigley as carrying out the assault and it mentions just a scuffle. Mr. Dixon attacked Mr. Sherlock in Low Moss Prison, slashing his neck after an argument as they left the church service. This seems to have stemmed from an internal Daniels clan dispute. Xander Sutherland, son of the late Jamie Daniel, was said to control long-term Clyde Hall and knows the Dixon brothers. The prison report fails to mention a weapon, and Mr. Sherlock went on to protection wing. James and Robert McCann, who were jailed in 2019 for kidnapping and assaulting a man, and both serving 7 and 8 year sentences, were hired as jail hitman by the Daniels. Robert ended up in solitary after attacking inmates relayed to the Lyons family. James McCann, who was suspected of the murder of James Goofy Doherty, who was knifed in the street and run over 3 times in 2006, was slashed in HMP schools for making threats. SPS struggled to keep a lid on the feud between Daniels and Lyons, after the police ran Operation Crackdown, which saw a large number of foot soldiers sent to jail. EncroChat from 2020 has 40 members from both clans being told that there is a threat to their life after experts decoded texts. Francis Fraggle Green, Jamie Daniels' son, he is also friends with Towie star Mark Wright, was sentenced to 3.5 years in 2012 for ordering a gang to beat up a gran. Robert Daniel got 3 years for his part in the attack on Suzanne Simpson. In 2015, Stephen Bonzo Daniels was carjacked in his cab, and in 2017 he was tailed in his car at 100 miles an hour before being caught up and carved up by bladed thugs. Stephen's mum, Annette Daniels, crime queen, ran an organised shoplifting ring and was jailed in March 2020 for her part at an Aberdeen Sheriff's Court. Author and journalist Russell Findlay, who wrote the book Lyons/Daniels Feud, was attacked on his doorstep a few Christmases ago and had acid thrown in his face. He managed to overpower the man and, luckily, had no lasting damage done. William Basil Burns was charged for this incident. In February 2021, 6 men linked to the Lyons were found guilty of conspiracy to murder and sentenced to 104 years in total. These men are appealing conviction as a miscarriage of justice. James McGregor, who is linked to the Daniels and Lyons family feud, was gunned down in the street a short while after a close associate of Kevin Carroll, who is said to be part of the alien abduction crew, had rammed a car with a van. The shooting happened in broad daylight in front of people and 3 kids. The shooter walked up to James McGregor and blasted him in the chest at close range. The gun jammed on the first shot. Saturday, the 11th of September 2021, Robert Daniel, nephew of late James Daniel, was held down by 4 men at the Dawes Home Recycling Centre at Anniesland, where he works, and they hacked at his head, back, legs and arms with machetes. It is thought to be a revenge attack for James McGregor's fatal shooting the week before. What are your thoughts on the Lyons and Daniels feud? Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to like and share, and if you're new to the channel and want to see more Street Crime UK content, then subscribe.